Josie knew what she was. She was a ghost, drifting silently along the edges of a life that had never truly belonged to her. A shadow stitched to the heel of a family that offered her nothing but darkness. 22 years ago, in the freezing corridor of a Brooklyn orphanage, a 5-year-old girl sat clutching a tattered stuffed animal, watching a stranger walk in with a camera crew. The photograph of him lifting her into his arms made the front page of the New York Times. And Josie was adopted, not out of love, but as part of a public relations campaign. 12 years later, in a clinic thick with the smell of antiseptic, a doctor spoke a single word that nailed her fate into place: infertile. Josie turned to look at her adoptive father, Warren Ashford, Manhattan real estate tycoon, the man who had once held her up before the lenses of the entire nation. But on his face she saw no sorrow. She saw the expression of an investor who had just realized his investment was a total loss. From that day on, she was no longer a daughter. She was a burden, a discarded act of charity the family found inconvenient to throw away. Tonight, at the annual Ashford Legacy Gala, where New York's elite displayed their power with diamonds and carefully polished smiles, Josie stood leaning against a cold marble column on the 60th floor penthouse in Manhattan, wearing a wine-red gown, not because it flattered her, but because Blythe had chosen it. Her adoptive sister, the flawless jewel of the Ashford family, had selected that deep red so it would serve as a backdrop for her own radiant champagne gold dress. Blythe drifted past her within a circle of society matrons, then paused, her voice sweet as a velvet-wrapped blade. "My sister," she said, always hiding in the shadows. "Father brought her back from Brooklyn, raised her for more than 20 years, and she still can't give this family a single grandchild." A beautiful crystal vase, but cracked from the inside. Soft laughter fluttered through the air. Pitying glances, sharp as knives, sliced against Josie's skin. But Josie did not cry. She did not tremble. She lifted her chin and looked straight through the crowd, a habit she had honed for 22 years to keep her tears from falling. She swallowed the pain, as she always did, and stood a little straighter. She did not know that tonight her life would change forever. Because the private elevator doors had just opened, a man stepped into the grand hall. Tall, dark hair, a charcoal black suit, a silver wolf pin fastened to his lapel. No one introduced him. No one dared. Yet the entire room of 300 people shifted, as when a predator enters an open field. They did not greet him. They parted for him. And from across the glittering hall of crystal light, the man's deep gray eyes, the color of a winter ocean, did not rest on Blythe in her shimmering gold. They did not settle on Warren, already bowing in welcome. Those eyes cut through 300 bodies and came to a stop on her. On Josie. On the ghost standing alone beside the cold stone column. The man was Kale Dragovich, leader of the Dragovich Syndicate, the most powerful underground organization on the east coast of the United States. And tonight he had not come to find a bride. He had come to find a queen. And he had just found her, standing alone in the corner the world had forgotten. If this story has touched you, please press like so more people can hear it. Share it with someone who needs to believe that their worth does not lie in the judgments of others. And subscribe to the channel so you will not miss the next stories, where the forgotten find their light. Warren Ashford was not a man who knew how to wait. He was a man who knew how to calculate. And in his mind, every calculation tonight led to a single answer: Kale Dragovich. So only seconds after that man stepped through the private elevator doors, Warren adjusted his tie, smoothed back his silver hair stiff with pomade, and cut through the crowd with a smile he had practiced thousands of times in the mirror. He pulled Blythe along with him, his hand resting at the small of his biological daughter's back, as though positioning a product about to be displayed behind glass. Blythe followed at his side, her champagne gold gown whispering around her ankles, each step measured so the crystal chandeliers would catch the most brilliant angle of the diamonds at her throat. She knew she was beautiful. She knew she dazzled. And she was certain there wasn't a man in this world who could look at her without wanting to possess her. Warren stopped 3 steps from KL, close enough to suggest warmth, far enough to signal respect. He inclined his head just enough, not too low, but enough that anyone watching would understand this was a man asking for something. "Mr. Dragovich," Warren began, his voice smooth as the finest olive oil. "It's an honor, truly an honor, to welcome you to our family gala. I believe tonight will mark the beginning of a most rewarding relationship." Kale did not answer. He did not nod. He did not sip his champagne. He stood there like a statue carved from black stone, the glass untouched in his hand, his deep gray eyes resting on Warren, with the cold patience of a predator waiting for its prey to finish, saying every foolish thing before it needed to speak. The silence was a living thing. It crawled up Warren's throat and tightened, forcing him to swallow before continuing. "This is my daughter," Warren said quickly, drawing Blythe forward like a merchant pulling the cloth from his most valuable merchandise. Blythe Ashford, a Vassar graduate with honors, fluent in 3 languages. She has represented our family at diplomatic events in Geneva and Milan. He listed her accomplishments as though reading from a resume, each line polished to a blinding shine. Then Warren lowered his voice and leaned in slightly, as if about to reveal his most precious secret. "And more importantly, Mr. Dragovich, my daughter is perfectly healthy, fully capable. She will give you worthy heirs, children who carry the blood of both our families." He emphasized the word heirs, as though selling future stock with guaranteed returns. Blythe smiled. It was a smile practiced hundreds of times, wide enough to reveal flawless white teeth, warm enough to suggest invitation, yet beneath it lay the gaze of a predator circling its prey. She stepped forward half a pace, tilting her head just enough to expose the curve of her neck, to let the chandelier light strike the diamonds glittering against her pale skin. Everything was calculated. Everything was a weapon. She had conquered powerful men at countless gatherings like this, and there was no reason tonight should be any different. But Kyle Dragovich was not those men. His silence stretched another beat, and another. The air around them thickened, grew heavier, like the stillness before a storm. Guests nearby began drifting subtly away, survival instinct warning them that something dangerous was unfolding in plain sight. At last, Kyle moved. He set his champagne glass down on the nearest table, slow and precise, like a man laying aside a weapon not in surrender, but because he had no need of it. Then he looked at Blythe for the first time, truly looked. His gray eyes traveled from the crown of her head to the tips of her shoes, unhurried, uninterested, with the detached appraisal of someone inspecting a shipment and finding it failed to meet even the most basic standard. It was not contempt. It was worse. It was indifference. The gaze of a man who had seen too many identical things to bother distinguishing among them. The smile on Blythe's lips began to crack, only slightly, almost imperceptibly, at the left corner of her mouth, where muscle could no longer maintain perfection under the weight of that look. For the first time in her life, Blythe Ashford understood what it meant to be judged and found lacking. For the first time, her eyes wavered. Warren saw it. A sheen of sweat gathered along his upper lip, glinting beneath the chandelier light like tiny diamonds of desperation. He opened his mouth, intending to add something, to fill the void, swallowing his hope. But Cale spoke first. 7 words, only 7, delivered in a low voice, not loud, yet each one carrying the weight of a stone dropped into a still lake. "She is not what I require." No explanation, no comfort, no opening to maneuver through. 7 words, and every calculation Warren Ashford had so carefully constructed for months collapsed in a single breath. Blythe drew in a breath sharp as shattering glass. Warren stood frozen, his mouth open yet no sound emerging, like a man who had just been punched in the stomach and had not yet felt the pain. Around them, 300 guests strained to pretend they had not heard, but every conversation had died, every glass had halted mid-air, and the entire 60th floor Manhattan penthouse had fallen so silent that one could hear crystal prisms brushing against one another in the current of conditioned air. Kale Dragovich's 7 words still hung suspended above them, heavy and irrevocable. But Kale was no longer looking at them. He had turned away, and those deep gray eyes moved with cold precision across the glittering hall, scanning with the certainty of a man who knew exactly what he was seeking. His gaze passed over expensive suits, over haute couture gowns, over polished smiles and diamonds the size of grapes flashing on manicured fingers, dismissing them as though they did not exist. Then it stopped. Across the room, beside a towering white marble column bathed in golden light, where a solitary figure in a wine-red gown leaned back against the cold stone, trying to make herself as small as possible within the vastness of the room. Josie. Cale lifted his chin in a slight motion, nearly imperceptible, yet carrying the weight of a decree. Then he spoke, and 2 words rang out in the breathless hall, not loud, yet as clear as a judge's gavel striking wood. "Her." Warren blinked, then blinked again. His mind spun wildly. trying to assemble the shattered fragments of information into something coherent. But each piece cut into his hands. Her. Which her? He followed Cale's line of sight and understood. The marble column, the wine-red gown, dark brown hair, Josie, little Josie, the adopted daughter, the infertile daughter, the one he had considered a loss for 10 years. Cale continued, his voice flat as a frozen lake. The agreement stands. All terms remain unchanged, but I choose her. And Warren Ashford's world fractured into 3 pieces. The first was shock. Pure, unfiltered shock, so intense he forgot how to breathe. Josie, the girl he kept hidden in corners at every event, the girl he never introduced to business partners, the girl he had once declared before the entire family was the greatest mistake of his life. The second piece was panic. If Cale withdrew, Warren would lose everything. The Ashford empire teetered on the brink, debts piling high, banks already calling, and Cale Dragovich was the final lifeline. Without this deal, Warren would sink. But the third piece, the final piece, came together fastest of all, because it was the piece Warren knew best: greed. The agreement stands. All terms remain unchanged. Cale was not canceling the contract. He was merely altering a variable, replacing Blythe with Josie, and to Warren, any variable would suffice, so long as the equation yielded the answer he needed. Biological daughter or adopted one, diamond or glass, it did not matter, so long as the money flowed into his accounts. Greed swallowed shock, and Warren began to nod, slowly at first, then more eagerly, like a dog scenting bone. But Blythe did not nod. Blythe Ashford had never been refused, never relegated to second place. Never, in all her 25 years of pampered privilege, been forced to watch someone else take what she believed was hers. And that someone was Josie. Josie, the shadow, the forgotten ornament, the cracked vase she had spent her life belittling. Rage ignited inside Blythe like gasoline meeting flame, burning through every polished layer of elegance she had so carefully constructed. Her voice tore through the silence, high, shrill, stripped of control. She is infertile. Father, tell him. She is nothing. She cannot give him anything. She is trash, a burden. She is. Cale did not turn to look at Blythe. He did not raise a finger. He did not shift his stance. He merely inclined his head slightly toward Warren, his eyes still fixed on the distant marble column, and lowered his voice. Lowered it to where those standing 3 steps away had to hold their breath to hear. Lowered it until the quiet itself became the most terrifying sound in the room. Tell your daughter to be silent. A pause, 1 measured beat, then softer still, almost a whisper, each syllable sharp as a surgeon's blade. Or I will. It was not a threat. It was worse. It was a promise. And Warren, with the survival instinct of a man who had lived long enough among power to recognize the edge of a cliff, immediately spun back, seized Blythe's arm, and yanked her behind him, hissing through clenched teeth. Be quiet. Right now. Blythe struggled, her eyes blazing red, but Warren's grip tightened until his knuckles blanched against her skin, and at last her scream died, leaving only ragged, choking breaths from someone silenced at the grandest stage of her life. Then Cale began to walk. The crowd parted. No order was given, no signal made, yet 300 people shifted aside, primal instinct commanding their bodies to clear the path for something larger, more dangerous, more powerful than anything they had ever encountered in their champagne-soaked gatherings. Each step he took across the marble floor made no sound, yet each carried the weight of judgment. He did not hurry. He did not slow. He moved with the steady rhythm of a man certain nothing in this world would dare stand in his way. And as he passed, whispers began to rise behind him, like waves retreating after a storm. Dragovich, Syndicate, someone murmured. The entire East Coast, another voice added. No one crosses him and lives, came a third. The fragments drifted into Josie's ears, assembling piece by piece into a portrait of the man approaching her, and the portrait did nothing to soothe her fear. It deepened it. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it inside her skull, a frantic drum hammering against her ribs. She wanted to run, to dissolve into the marble at her back, to melt into the cold stone and return to being the invisible ghost she had always been. But her legs refused to move. She stood there, frozen, pressed against the column, watching him come closer, closer, closer still, until he stopped before her, near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. near enough that the scent of sandalwood and something clean and sharp like morning frost filled her lungs, near enough that she had to tilt her head back, farther and farther, before she finally met those deep gray eyes looking down at her with something she had never seen in anyone's gaze. Not pity, not curiosity, not desire, but recognition, as though he looked at her and saw what the entire world had overlooked. He opened his mouth, and when he spoke, it was not a question, but a statement, carrying the weight of a verdict long since decided. "You are Josephine." 2 words. Her name. Only her name, yet the way he said it made it sound like a decree, as though speaking her name was enough to turn her from a ghost into something solid, from invisible into undeniable. Josie could only nod, her throat locked tight, her tongue pressed against the roof of her dry mouth. She did not believe she could produce any sound while those deep gray eyes were so close that she could see the darker flecks within them, dense and endless as a starless night sky. Then the whispers began. They crept up behind her from the crowd she had forgotten existed while Cale stood before her, spreading like slow poison through the veins of the room. "She is infertile," a sharp female voice hissed from the left. "Has he lost his mind?" "Choosing the adopted one over Blythe," a man muttered somewhere behind her. "He must be punishing Warren, humiliating him. No one truly wants a woman who cannot bear children." Each sentence was a fine needle piercing through the red silk of her gown, through skin and flesh, lodging precisely in the old wounds she had spent 22 years trying to conceal. She shrank inward. The old instinct surged like a rising tide, dragging her back toward the familiar dark where she survived by disappearing. Her foot shifted back half a step. Her spine pressed harder into the cold marble. Her shoulders curved inward. Her head began to lower, that reflex honed over 22 years. Bow your head to avoid the stare. Make yourself small to avoid the blow. But there was stone behind her and Cale in front of her, and nowhere left to vanish. Cale did not turn toward the crowd. He did not lift a finger. Yet he noticed. He saw her shoulders close in. He saw her chin dip. He saw the light in her eyes flicker and dim like a candle caught in wind. He leaned down slightly, just enough to bring his face closer to hers, just enough that his voice belonged only to her. "Listen to me." Low, quiet, for her alone. "The noise behind you is not speech. It is insects." He paused, his gray eyes holding her trembling blue-gray gaze as though anchoring her in place. And insects do not have the right to judge a flame. She heard every word, felt them fall into her chest like drops of hot water striking frozen water, melting a small circle around her heart. She did not understand why a stranger would speak to her in a way no one in 27 years had ever thought she deserved. Then Warren stepped in. Of course he did. He had swallowed his shock, recalculated the equation, accepted that Josie would replace Blythe in the agreement, but he needed Cale to understand he was delivering flawed goods. That was the duty of an honest seller, he told himself, though the only honesty Warren Ashford had ever possessed was honesty about his own greed. "Mr. Dragovich," Warren began, striving for steadiness yet trembling at the edge. "I must clarify, for fairness to both parties, that Josephine has certain limitations. She cannot." He did not finish. Not because he lacked courage, but because Cale had turned, slowly, each degree of movement like the cocking of a weapon. His gray gaze fell on Warren, and Warren felt the temperature around him drop 10 degrees. But Cale did not speak to Warren alone. He addressed the entire room. His voice rose slightly, only enough for 300 people to hear every syllable, enough for his words to reach the farthest corners of the glittering hall, to strike the marble and echo beneath crystal chandeliers, to etch themselves into every memory present that night. "I do not need the Ashford dynasty. I have an empire." He paused, letting the first sentence settle beneath their skin. "Empires are not built with infants. Empires are built with strength that cannot be broken, with loyalty that cannot be bought, with a queen who stands beside me." His tone lowered, sharper now, colder. "Not a vessel that exists merely to be filled." The sentence sliced cleanly, severing every label her family had bound around her for a decade. Then he spoke again, and this time it was not a blade but fire. "I do not need heirs from her body. I need the fire in her soul." Silence. Absolute. Complete. 300 people stopped breathing at once. Soft jazz still drifted from the speakers, but it seemed to belong to another world, distant and irrelevant. No one dared move. No one dared glance sideways. Each person processed the shock in private, yet all shared one understanding. They had just witnessed something unheard of in New York society. The most powerful man in the room had declared before them all that the girl called worthless, the girl labeled an empty vessel, the girl her own father would not introduce, was the only flame he required. Then Cale did one final thing, and if his words had been thunder, this gesture was rain after the storm. He lifted his hand slowly, precisely, his gloved fingers brushing her temple, where a strand of dark brown hair had slipped loose, resting across her forehead like evidence of the chaos this night had brought. He moved the strand aside, gently, unhurriedly, tucking it neatly behind her ear. His fingertips grazed her skin, leaving warmth in their wake, and Josie forgot how to breathe. The gesture was impossibly soft, light as a butterfly landing, light as a newborn's first breath, and it came from the hand of a man the entire East Coast feared, a man whose very presence carried lethal power. That hand could dismantle empires, yet it had just brushed her hair as though she were the most precious thing he had ever touched. The room held its breath, and Josie stood there against the cold marble, the first tear shimmering at the corner of her eye, not understanding what had just happened, knowing only that for the first time in her life, someone had seen her and had not looked away. The world tilted. It truly tilted, as if the marble floor beneath Josie's feet had been pulled 30 degrees off balance, and she was sliding, slowly, helplessly, toward a cliff whose bottom she could not see. Her heart pounded in her ears, not a steady rhythm but a war drum, frantic and uneven, each beat striking the inside of her ribs like a hammer. Her knees weakened, her legs threatened to give way, and she forced every remaining ounce of strength into her calves, her ankles, her toes gripping inside her heels just to remain upright. Her head spun. The chandelier lights blurred into golden streaks swirling across the ceiling. Cale's face before her shifted in and out of focus, sharp then hazy, as though she were seeing him through rippling water. 27 years. 27 years of living in shadow, of learning to make herself small, of swallowing tears, of accepting that she was defective, damaged, the empty space where value ought to have been. 27 years in which no one looked at her and saw anything beyond what she lacked. And now, the most powerful man in this room, the man whose name made the East Coast tremble, stood before 300 pillars of New York society and called her Fire, Fire. She, Josie Ashford, the orphan from Brooklyn, the cracked crystal vase, the charitable burden, the ghost in another family's home, had just been named Fire in front of a world that had called her Ash. Then Cale reached inside his jacket. The motion was slow, deliberate, unhurried, as though everything he did had long ago been decided, and only time needed to catch up. His hand withdrew a small box wrapped in black velvet, small enough to rest in his palm, yet heavier in meaning than anything Josie had ever held. He opened it. Light from the chandeliers poured inside, and she saw it. Resting on black satin lay a ring, not the kind she, nor anyone in that room, had ever seen. There was no diamond, not a single one. At its center was a black pearl, perfect to the point of unreality, round, luminous, deep, as if a fragment of moonless night had been captured and sealed in nacre. The pearl drew light toward itself, swallowing crystal gleam, candle glow, the reflections of 300 glittering diamonds, holding them within until they became a slow-turning galaxy beneath its surface. The band was platinum, slender and exquisite, shaped like a wolf curled protectively around the pearl. This was not a ring for a trembling bride in white. It was a ring for a queen, for a ruler, for the flame he had named. Cale looked at her, and for the first time his voice softened, only slightly, like ice thinning at the edge of a frozen lake. Your family taught you that a person's worth is measured by what she produces, that if you could not give them an heir, you were useless, that if your body could not perform as they demanded, you had no reason to exist. He paused, letting the words settle into her. They were wrong, all of them. Your worth does not lie in what you can produce. It lies in what you are, in what you have survived. In 27 years of standing in darkness without letting it consume you. He took her left hand. It was cold, trembling, small inside his. Her fingers curled instinctively like a frightened fledgling, but he held her steadily, warm and firm, neither crushing nor loose, only enough for her to know he was there and would not let go. He removed the ring from the velvet box and placed it at the tip of her ring finger. Then he pushed gently, The ring slid past the first knuckle, then the second, and settled into place. A perfect fit, as if it had been crafted for this hand, this finger, this woman, cool, heavy, the weight of platinum and black pearl and all it symbolized pressed against her skin like a vow forged in metal. He did not release her hand. His thumb rested lightly against the pearl as his voice rose again, this time for all 300 silent witnesses. From this moment forward, you stand under my protection. Each word was spoken clearly and slowly, carved into the air. Whoever insults you insults me. Whoever harms you will answer to Dragovich. He paused, and when he continued, there was a finality in his tone that no one dared mistake for empty speech. You are no longer their shadow. You are no longer a burden. You are no longer an empty vessel. He held her gaze, and in those deep gray eyes, Josie saw something she would remember until her last breath. Certainty. Not the cold certainty of power alone, but the certainty of a man who had recognized truth where the world had failed to look, and would never allow that truth to be buried again. You are my queen. And then the tear fell. A single drop gathered at the corner of her right eye, shimmering beneath crystal light like a small jewel of water and salt. It lingered for one suspended second upon her lashes, then slipped free. It traced the curve of her cheek, slid along her jaw, and disappeared into the neckline of her wine-red gown. It was not a tear of sorrow. She had shed enough of those in 27 years, weeping behind locked bedroom doors, in bathrooms with the faucet running to drown the sound, crying until she believed herself emptied into desert dust. This tear was different. It rose from somewhere deeper than pain, deeper than shame, deeper than every wound the Ashfords had inflicted. It came from the place where a 5-year-old girl in a Brooklyn orphanage had buried hope beneath layers of rejection. It was release, a prison door opening after 27 years, the sound of chains striking the floor. Josie stood there, the black pearl cool and heavy upon her finger, the tear still wet on her cheek, and for the first time in her life, she did not wipe it away. For the first time, she let it fall. Let someone see her cry. Let someone see her fragile. Because the man standing before her, the man holding her hand, had seen everything she had ever hidden and had not turned away. Cale kept hold of her hand and led her away. He did not pull. He did not rush. He simply walked, and she followed, because his hand was the only steady thing in a world that had just been turned upside down. The crowd parted once more. 300 people moved aside in silence, their eyes tracking them as though witnessing a procession whose purpose no one understood. Josie felt every gaze settle on her back, hot and prying, envious, contemptuous, pitying, all of it blending into an invisible weight pressing down on her shoulders with each step. Yet Cale's hand did not waver. Warm, firm, unyielding, like heated iron driven through ice. She held to that warmth and kept walking. They crossed the grand hall, passed along a marble corridor lined with oversized oil paintings Warren Ashford had purchased to decorate the hollow shell of culture he wished to project, moved through double glass doors opened from the outside by a man dressed in black who needed no instruction, and stepped out onto the balcony. The Manhattan night struck Josie's face like a splash of cold water. Sharp, bracing, clarifying, the air 60 floors above the street was different. Thinner, cleaner. It carried a trace of metal in autumn sky. She drew in a long breath, the first true breath she had taken since Cale entered the hall. Below them, Manhattan spread like black velvet strewn with diamonds. Millions of lights flickered. Streets formed glowing grids. Traffic flowed slowly like blood through the veins of a vast living creature breathing in the dark. The noise of the gala faded behind the sealed glass doors, replaced by wind, distant sirens, and the quiet between two people standing side by side against a cold steel railing. Josie released his hand, not because she wished to, but because she needed both hands gripping the railing to steady herself. She looked down at the city, at the countless pinpoints of light, each one a life, a story, a hidden sorrow, and she felt smaller than any of them. Then she spoke. Her voice was a whisper, fragile, nearly carried away by the wind before reaching him, yet within it lay the full weight of 27 years of wondering, of not understanding, of asking whether she was worthy of love. Why? One word. Only one. Yet it was the only question that mattered. Why her? Why not Blythe? More beautiful, more perfect. Able to give him what she never could. Why the cracked vessel instead of the whole one? Why? Cale stood beside her, both of them looking out over the city rather than at each other. He was silent for a moment. and his silence was not hesitation but discernment, the restraint of a man who spoke only when his words carried weight. Then he answered, his voice low and deliberate, each sentence short and clean as a suppressed shot. My entire life I have been surrounded by transactions. Everyone who approaches me wants something. Power, money, protection. They bring daughters, promises, vows of loyalty, all of it beautifully packaged merchandise. He paused as the wind lifted his dark hair, revealing the hard lines of his jaw illuminated by the city glow. When I looked at you tonight, while they threw their words at you, I saw the only thing in that room that was not for sale. Someone tested by fire who did not burn. He turned to her then, and his gray eyes beneath the Manhattan night were deeper than any abyss she had known. They call you empty. I see a soul that is self-contained. You do not need a child to be whole. You do not need a man's approval to have value. You carry a strength they cannot comprehend, because it was forged in the silence they forced upon you. He faced the skyline again, his voice lowering, nearly dissolving into the wind. That is the only thing I trust. Silence settled between them, thick and warm as wool against the cold. Then he spoke again, and this time there was something new in his tone, a faint fracture in the steel he wore around himself. Your father believes he has sold you to me. He is a fool. I am freeing you. He paused and drew a breath. When he continued, his voice dropped to its lowest register, no longer command but confession, the kind of truth a man like Kale Dragovich would speak only once. And it feels as though I am freeing myself. Josie wept. Not a single tear as in the hall. This time the tears came freely, warm against the cold wind, tracing her cheeks, falling to her chin, soaking into the red silk at her chest. Yet she did not turn away. She did not hide her face. She did not swallow them as she had done thousands of times behind locked doors and running faucets. For the first time, she allowed someone to stand beside her while she cried. Kale did not wipe her tears. He did not tell her to stop. He did not offer hollow comfort. He understood. These tears were not meant to be halted. They were meant to fall. They were 27 years of captivity breaking loose, a cell door thrown open, a river bursting its dam after a long winter. To stop them would be harm, not kindness, so he remained there in silence beside her. When her tears slowed and her breathing steadied, when the Manhattan wind dried the tracks upon her face, Kale spoke once more. He did not look at her. His eyes remained on the horizon, where city light met the dark sky in a blurred seam between reality and dream. They tried to turn your pain into a weapon against you. Instead, they forged you into steel. Then silence again. Not the heavy silence she had known in the Ashford house, thick with judgment and disdain. This was different. Warm, safe, whole. Two figures standing on a 60th floor balcony, overlooking Manhattan at night, the wind cold yet neither of them feeling it. And for the first time in 27 years, Josie understood that silence was not always loneliness. Sometimes, silence was shelter. The days after the gala passed like the dream of someone waking from a long coma. Josie left the Manhattan penthouse, left Warren Ashford's world and the walls saturated with 22 years of quiet contempt, and stepped into the Dragovich estate in the Connecticut countryside, as though crossing onto another planet. It was not a gilded palace as she might once have imagined. It was a fortress. Gray stone, solid, reserved, rising among ancient oak trees as if it had stood there before men ever claimed the land. Thick walls, vast windows overlooking a lake smooth as glass. Inside, dark wood, books stacked from floor to ceiling, oil paintings chosen not to impress but because someone truly loved them, and natural light pouring through towering panes, blurring the line between forest and home. The place felt powerful, quiet, and strangely, deeply warm, like its master. But healing does not happen in a single night. No one heals in a single night. 22 years of living as a ghost do not dissolve because of a black pearl ring and a declaration before 300 witnesses. The wounds ran deeper than that, into bone, into reflex, into the instinct to lower her head whenever someone entered the room. On her first morning in the estate, Kale walked into the dining room and Josie startled. Her shoulders drew inward, her chin dipped, her eyes fixed on her plate. Her entire body made itself smaller, the reflex programmed by more than 2 decades of believing that the presence of an adult meant judgment, correction, disappointment. Kale noticed. He said nothing. He sat opposite her, poured coffee, unfolded the newspaper, and read as though it were the most ordinary morning in the world. He gave her space. He gave her time. He gave her permission to be afraid without punishing her for it. A week later, she carried a teacup from the kitchen toward the library and slipped on freshly polished wood. The cup fell. It shattered into 5 or 6 sharp pieces. Tea spread in a brown stain across oak, and Josie panicked. Not because porcelain had broken, but because 22 years in the Ashford house had taught her that every mistake carried a price. Every broken object was proof of her inadequacy. Every sharp sound would summon a cutting remark, or worse, that cold look from Warren that said, "This is why I regret bringing you home." She dropped to the floor, hands trembling as she gathered shards, apologizing in a rush. "I am sorry. I am sorry. I did not mean to. I am sorry." Her voice rose, thinned, edged toward tears. Cale came to her. He knelt beside her and gently removed a jagged piece from her fingers before it could draw blood. He collected the remaining fragments into his palm, stood, discarded them. Then he poured another cup from the still warm kettle and placed it into her hands. His voice was even. No irritation, no pity, only truth. "It is a cup, not a crime." 4 words. Josie sat there on the wooden floor, holding the new warmth between her palms, and watched him walk away, and felt a small crack split through the wall that had stood inside her chest for 22 years. Only a small crack, but enough for light to slip through. Then came the night she saw his other face. Sleep would not come. The old insomnia followed her from the Ashford house to Connecticut, like a stray dog loyal to its former master. Near midnight, she wandered barefoot along the dark corridor, thin nightgown brushing her knees. A thin line of golden light spilled from beneath the door of Cale's study. She heard his voice, but not the voice she knew. The voice she knew was low, controlled, the voice that told her a broken cup was not a crime. This one was different. Cold, measured, slow in a way that made each word fall like a bullet released one at a time into darkness. She did not understand the Slavic language he spoke. She did not need to. Tone required no translation. That voice was issuing orders, and someone on the other end was afraid. She heard fear not in replies, but in the long silences between his sentences. Silences where the unseen listener did not dare interrupt, did not dare breathe too loudly, only obeyed. A chill moved down her spine, not from wind, from recognition. The man who had brushed her hair like butterfly wings, who had lifted shards from her hands, who had stood beside her on a balcony and let her cry, was also the man the East Coast feared. She stepped back. Her arm brushed the half-closed door. The wood creaked. The voice stopped at once. Silence, then footsteps. The door opened. Cale stood there, phone still in his hand, light from the study casting a long shadow behind him. His gray eyes met hers. For a fraction of a second, they were cold, steel, blade, ice in January. The eyes of Cale Dragovich, leader of the syndicate. Then he saw her, truly saw her, and in a blink so brief she might have missed it. Something shifted, not melting, faster than that, deeper, like fire igniting beneath the ocean floor, unseen at the surface yet burning bright below, meant only for her. "You should sleep." His voice was soft, entirely different from the one on the phone, 2 worlds contained in one man. And Josie understood in that midnight doorway that Kyle Dragovich was divided in 2. To the world he was steel and shadow, to her he was shelter. Weeks later they sat by the library fireplace. Flames snapped softly. Orange light danced across the spines of old books. Josie curled beside him on the leather sofa, legs folded beneath her, reading. She had grown used to his silence, the kind that did not demand filling, did not press, simply allowed 2 people to exist side by side and feel complete. That evening he reached for his wine glass, and his shirt sleeve shifted. Firelight caught a long white scar along his forearm, running from wrist nearly to elbow. Josie lowered her book. She looked. Without thinking, she reached out and touched it. Her fingertips traced the uneven line of healed flesh. He did not pull away. He did not flinch. He did not hide it. He watched her fingers resting on his scar, silent for a moment, then spoke. 19. A man my father trusted stabbed him in the back. I tried to stop it. I earned this. He paused. The fire cracked. Shadows trembled on the wall. I could not save him. A long silence followed. Josie kept her hand there, gentle, as though touching his pain to show him she saw it. Then he spoke again, his voice low, and for the first time she heard not strength, but the fatigue of someone who had carried strength too long. That was the last time anyone came close enough to hurt me. He turned toward her, firelight flickering in gray eyes. Until you. The nightmare came at 3 a.m, as it always did. As it had come hundreds of nights before in the Ashford bedroom and now followed her to Connecticut like the most loyal ghost she had never invited. In the dream, she stood once more in the old clinic. Fluorescent lights bleached the ceiling white. The smell of antiseptic burned her nose. The doctor sat behind his desk and opened his mouth. But the voice that came out was not his. It was Blythe's, sweet and sharp, empty vessel. Then the doctor vanished, and Warren stood there, looking down at her with the cold eyes of an investor reviewing a loss. His lips moved, yet the voice was the doctor's again, repeating a single word like a funeral bell. Infertile, infertile, infertile. The walls of the clinic collapsed. She stood in the Ashford Grand Hall. 300 faces turned toward her. 300 mouths opened in unison and spoke with one voice. Burden. Josie jolted upright. Cold sweat soaked her nightgown, clinging to her back and chest. Her heart pounded as if trying to escape her ribs. She sat in the darkness of her bedroom at the Drugovich estate, fists gripping the blanket, breathing hard, eyes wide, and it took nearly a full minute before she understood where she was. Not the Ashford house, not the clinic, not the hall of accusing faces. Connecticut. Safe. But her body did not believe it. 22 years of fear do not surrender because the mind whispers that danger has passed. She rose, bare feet against cold wood, crossed to the door, and stepped into the hallway. The corridor at 3 a.m. was silent. Moonlight poured through the tall window at the far end, casting a long silver ribbon across the floor. She walked without direction, knowing only that she could not lie alone in the dark with Blythe and Warren's voices echoing in her skull. Then she saw light, a narrow thread of gold slipping from beneath the library door. She stopped outside and did not knock. She did not enter. She stood and looked through the narrow opening. Cale sat in a leather armchair in the corner of the library. A lamp cast warm light across his face, carving shadows along his cheekbones and jaw. A glass of whiskey rested on the arm of the chair, amber catching the glow. Files lay open on the table beside him, across his lap, scattered at his feet. Pages filled with print she could not read from where she stood. He was awake. Perhaps he was always awake at this hour. Perhaps this was when he belonged to the other world, the world where his voice turned to steel and men trembled at the end of the line. Yet in this light he did not look like a crime lord. He looked like a tired man carrying an empire on his shoulders while the rest of the world slept. She did not go in. She did not want to break the stillness, did not want him to shift from the Cale of that world to the Cale who was hers, did not want to become another weight at 3 a.m, and he did not call to her. Perhaps he knew she was there. Perhaps he heard her bare feet against the floor, soft but not soft enough to escape a man who survived by hearing what others ignored. But he did not summon her. He left the choice to her, enter or remain. Both were allowed. She stood there for a long while, 5 minutes or 10, watching the silhouette of him through the seam of light, watching him turn a page, lift the whiskey, set it down, and she felt safe, not because he had declared it, not because of a ring or a promise, but because he was there, awake, steady, one door away. That was enough. She returned to her room, but sleep did not return. The nightmare voices had faded, yet they left residue like dark silt at the bottom of her thoughts. She knew if she closed her eyes they would gather again, so she did something she had never done. She took blank paper from the drawer. She picked up the pen left beside the bed. She sat and began to write. For the first time in her life. Not a letter, not a diary. She did not know what to call it. She simply wrote. She wrote about the 5-year-old girl in the Brooklyn orphanage hallway, clutching a torn stuffed animal and waiting for someone to come and love her. She wrote about Blythe's laughter ringing through Ashford corridors, sharp as glass, slicing her ears for 20 years. She wrote about the clinic that smelled of antiseptic, and the word infertile printed on a test result like a death sentence for her worth. She wrote about nights crying in the bathroom with the faucet running, weeping until her eyes swelled and her chest ached, until no tears remained, then washing her face and stepping out with a practiced smile. She wrote about anger she had never permitted herself to feel. Anger at Warren for turning her into a public relations display and discarding her when she yielded no return. Anger at Blythe for turning her pain into amusement. Anger at a world that looked at her and saw only what she lacked instead of what she carried. She wrote until the moonlight thinned, until the sky shifted from black to gray to pale violet, until the first threads of dawn slipped through the oaks and fell across the pages, across her hands, across the slanted lines of ink blurred by tears she did not remember shedding. In the morning, Cale entered her room with black coffee, no sugar, as he did every day. Josie sat on the bed, pages gathered in her lap, eyes swollen, hair tangled, looking like someone who had fought through the night, and she had. He set the coffee on the bedside table. His gaze moved over the stack of handwritten pages, over the tear stains, over the fallen pen. He did not read. He did not ask. He did not touch them. He looked for a single second, then lifted the cup and placed it gently atop the stack, so the weight of porcelain would keep the pages from drifting in the breeze from the open window. Then he walked out. He did not look back. He did not speak. Josie watched his broad back in the white shirt disappear beyond the doorway, watched the dark coffee resting upon the fragile pages that held 27 years of pain, and she understood. This was how Cale Dregovich loved. Not with declarations, not with vows, but with space, with presence that did not demand, with a cup of black coffee placed upon her sorrow, not to erase it, but to keep it from scattering before she was ready to face it. The news arrived on an ordinary Tuesday evening, the kind Josie had begun to cherish in Connecticut. When the sunset turned the lake to burnished copper, and she sat on the living room sofa with a book, while Cale worked at the desk nearby, pen in hand, files spread before him, his quiet presence as steady and warm as a fireplace in winter. Then the evening broadcast flickered on the television she rarely used, and Warren Ashford's name scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Josie looked up. A reporter stood outside Ashford Group's 40-story glass headquarters in Midtown Manhattan, the building Warren had once called a legacy for generations. And behind the reporter, employees were carrying boxes of files out the doors. Bankruptcy. Collapse. Debts layered upon debts. Banks withdrawing support. Partners turning away. No one reaching out to save him. Then Warren himself appeared on the screen, stepping out of the building. And Josie almost did not recognize him. He was thinner, older, his face gray as old newsprint, his eyes hollow and unfocused. The tailored suit hung wrong on his frame. The tie was crooked. He moved through the barricade of reporters like a man whose spine had been removed. Josie watched. She felt no triumph, no grief, only a strange stillness where she had once imagined there would be heat, as if she were observing a storm from inside a house built strong enough that the rain could not reach her. She turned toward Cale. He remained at his desk, eyes on the documents, pen moving across paper as though he had not heard the broadcast. But she knew he heard everything. "Did you do that for me?" she asked. Her voice was light, not accusing, not grateful, simply searching. Cale did not lift his gaze. His handwriting continued, even and controlled. A man who turns his child into merchandise does not deserve to be a business partner. It is a principle. His tone was flat, precise, the tone he used when speaking of strategy. But Josie watched his hand. His fingers tightened around the pen until the knuckles whitened, the pressure so hard she thought the instrument might snap. His words spoke of principle. His grip spoke of something else. She did not ask again. She did not need to. She looked back at the screen where Warren Ashford climbed into a yellow taxi instead of a chauffeured car, and she turned the television off. The screen went dark. A chapter closed, yet old chapters rarely close cleanly. 3 days later, on an autumn afternoon scented with damp earth and falling oak leaves, the gate intercom sounded. Leon entered the sitting room and informed her that someone was asking for her at the gate. Josie walked down the stone path toward the iron bars and saw her. Blithe, but not the Blythe of the gala in champagne silk and diamonds. Not the predator with velvet-edged words. The woman outside the gate was another version entirely. Hair uncombed, no makeup, eyes swollen and red, a wrinkled coat that the old Blythe would never have worn in public. The luxury gone, the certainty gone. She looked, Josie realized, exactly as she had once described her sister. Like someone with nothing. "Sister," Blythe said. 2 words, and they cut deeper than any insult she had ever spoken. Not because they wounded, but because they arrived 22 years too late. Blythe spoke in a rush, voice shaking, tears falling. Warren had lost everything. The house was sold, accounts frozen, their world collapsing. She begged, "Please speak to KL, please help, please do something." Anything. Josie stood inside the gate and let the emotions move through her like water over stone. Sadness, pity, anger, weariness, then quiet. She answered calmly, her voice steady, without tremor or cruelty. You had 22 years to call me your sister. 22 years. And you chose to call me empty, to call me a burden, to call me worthless. She paused and met Blythe's eyes, and there was no hatred there, only truth. I do not hate you, but I do not owe you. Then she turned and walked back along the path beneath falling leaves. She did not look back, not once. From the second-floor window, Cale had watched the exchange from beginning to end. He did not intervene, not because he did not wish to, but because he knew this was hers to face. When she stepped inside, he was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He did not ask for details. He did not praise. He only asked softly, "Are you all right?" Josie looked at him and smiled, small but real. "I am." For the first time in 27 years, those words were not armor. They were truth. That night, Josie stood before the bathroom mirror. The second time she had done so with awareness. The first had been in the Ashford dressing room before the gala, when she had seen only a ghost in a wine-colored gown chosen by someone else. A woman who felt she had no right to occupy space. Tonight, she saw no ghost. She saw a 28-year-old woman with tired eyes that nevertheless shone brighter, clearer, alive. Her back was straight, not from defense, but from ease. The black pearl ring caught the bathroom light, its dark surface holding a quiet galaxy within. She looked at her reflection, and the woman in the mirror looked back. And for the first time, neither of them apologized for existing. The thought came to Josie one morning as she stood at the library window overlooking the lake, a cup of black coffee without sugar in her hand, the same cup Cale placed beside her each day. It did not arrive suddenly. It rose slowly from the deepest layer of memory, from a fragment she had buried for 22 years, because it hurt too much to touch. Brooklyn, the orphanage, the small church at the end of the street she remembered only in flashes from when she was 5, the scent of candles, the sound of bells, a warm hand resting on the crown of her head. She needed to go back. She did not know what she was searching for, only that it was there, waiting for her, waiting for 22 years. Cale did not ask why when she said she wanted to go to Brooklyn. He simply nodded, took the keys, and drove. 2 hours on the highway. She sat in the passenger seat watching Connecticut fade into the outskirts of New York, and then into the city itself. Neither of them spoke. Their silence had become its own language, one she now understood. When the car stopped in front of the small brick church on Flatbush Avenue, its rusted bell tower leaning slightly above worn stone steps, Josie felt her chest tighten. The building was smaller than she remembered. Of course it was smaller. She had last seen it through the eyes of a 5-year-old. She opened the car door and then looked back at Cale. He remained behind the wheel and gave a small shake of his head. Not refusal. Permission. Go. This is yours. She nodded and climbed the steps. Inside, the church was dim and cool, smelling of old wax and damp wood. Colored light from stained glass windows fell in muted reds and blues across the stone floor. At the front, near the altar, an elderly man was arranging hymn books. His back was bent, his white hair thin. His hands trembled faintly. Father Thomas Brennan. He turned at the sound of her steps and looked at her. 1 second. 2. Then recognition flooded his face. His eyes widened and filled. "Josephine," he whispered, and her name in his mouth sounded different from the way Warren or Blythe had ever spoken it. It sounded like a prayer answered after 22 years. He remembered her. He had been waiting. Her mother's name was Catherine, 19 years old, poor beyond dignity, sick with a disease she could not afford to treat, the kind that consumed quietly from within. No family, no one in the world but the infant she held as though holding the universe. Father Thomas spoke in a trembling voice, staring into the air as if watching the memory unfold again. On the last night, Catherine brought the baby to the chapel behind the altar. Candlelight flickered against the statue of the Virgin, plaster eyes somehow gentle. She held her daughter through the dark hours, from dusk until dawn, singing with a voice worn thin by illness, barely a voice at all, yet still singing because her child needed to hear her mother one final time. In the morning, she placed Josie into Father Thomas's arms and left behind a letter. One letter, written in pencil on cheap paper, every word pressed carefully as though carved in stone. She asked that it be given to her daughter when she was old enough. But when Mr. Ashford came to adopt you, Father Thomas said, his voice heavy with regret aged over decades, he took the letter, said he would give it to you himself. I believed him. He swallowed. I should not have. Yet Father Thomas had been cautious. Before handing over the original, he copied every word by hand onto another sheet and kept it in his desk drawer for 22 years, waiting for the child to return. He placed the yellowed page into Josie's trembling hands. She needed both hands to steady it. She read, "My daughter, you are the only thing in my life that was not a mistake. You are the flame I held through winter night. Shine, even if the world tries to extinguish you. I love you. I have always loved you." Josie broke. Not the quiet tears she had known. Not the hidden crying behind running faucets. This was different. Her entire body shook. Her knees gave way and she sank onto the wooden pew, clutching the fragile paper to her chest, weeping like the 5-year-old girl she once had been, the child waiting in an orphanage hallway with a torn stuffed animal. But now she knew. Someone had loved her. Before Warren. Before Blythe's cruelty. Before the word infertile. A 19-year-old woman with nothing had held her all night and called her flame. And Warren had hidden it. Hidden the letter. Hidden the proof that she had been loved. Because a child who believes she is unloved is easier to control. She did not know how long she sat there. When her breathing steadied and the letter was folded carefully and tucked inside her blouse against her heart, she embraced Father Thomas, thanked him, and stepped outside. The Brooklyn afternoon light was almost blinding after the chapel's dimness. The black car waited at the curb. Cale remained behind the wheel. He did not step out. He did not search for her. He waited, as he always did. When she approached, he unlocked the passenger door from inside. He did not ask what happened. He did not comment on her swollen eyes or tear-stained cheeks. He simply opened the door. She slid into the seat. Then, without thinking, she leaned toward him and rested her head against his shoulder. The first time she had chosen to touch him. Not his hand guiding hers. Not his fingers brushing her hair. Not the ring placed upon her skin. This time it was her choice. He did not react with surprise. He did not speak. He allowed her to rest there, the letter warm against her heart, and drove them home through Brooklyn, through Manhattan, through the fading suburbs, past oak trees turning gold, back to Connecticut, in silence. That night, when the black car glided through the iron gates of the estate and came to a stop before the front entrance, Josie stepped out with the letter still tucked inside her blouse, pressed against her skin, against her heart, warmer than anything she had ever carried on her body. She did not eat dinner. She did not speak another word to KL. She went straight to the library, sat down in the familiar leather armchair, switched on the desk lamp, unfolded the yellowed paper, and read. She read it again. Then again. Every word, every faded stroke of pencil on aged paper, every period, every comma. As if she read it enough times, her mother's voice would rise from the page, the hoarse voice Father Thomas had described. The voice that had sung her through that final night in the small chapel in Brooklyn. "My daughter, you are the only thing in my life that was not a mistake." She read that line 10 times, 20 times, and with each reading it cut deeper into her chest, not because it wounded, but because it was beautiful, beautiful to the point of cruelty, because it had been there for 22 years and she had not known. Her mother loved her. Catherine, 19, poor, sick, alone in the world, had looked at her newborn child and seen a flame, not a burden, not a regret, not an investment, a flame. And Warren had hidden that, taken the letter from Father Thomas's hand, slipped it into the pocket of his expensive suit, carried it home and hidden it, or discarded it, or burned it. It did not matter. The result was the same. 22 years Josie had lived in darkness, without knowing that someone had lit a fire for her before the darkness began. The pain rose. But this time it was not the old pain she knew, the heavy sorrow that bent her shoulders and made her shrink. This pain was hot, sharp, red. This was not sadness. It was anger. Josie was angry. For the first time in 27 years, she allowed herself to feel the fury she had buried beneath layers of endurance and silence. The fury she had forbidden because adopted children were not allowed to be angry, because infertile daughters had no right to be angry, because shadows had no voice with which to be angry. But tonight, she was angry. Angry at Warren for stealing the letter, for stealing Catherine's lullaby, for stealing the only proof that she had ever been loved without condition. Angry that he had kept her in darkness because a child who believes she is unloved is easier to command, easier to control, easier to turn into a tool, and angry at herself. Angry that for 22 years she had believed it. Believed that no one loved her. Believed that she was a burden. Believed she was nothing. Believed Blythe's words. Believed Warren's cold gaze. Believed the world's pity. All while her mother's letter, the proof that it was all a lie, lay somewhere in the Ashford house, buried and silenced. The anger surged like a black tide, crashing through every wall she had built. And Josie stood, seized the glass of water from the table, and threw it. She threw it hard, with all the strength in her slender arm that had never thrown anything at anyone before. The glass struck the opposite wall, a sharp crack, clean. It shattered into dozens of pieces. Water splashed across leather spines, across wallpaper, across oak flooring. Then silence, thick and heavy, only her ragged breathing and the last drops of water sliding down the wall to the floor. She collapsed to her knees, curled inward on the library floor among shards of glass and scattered papers, the letter clenched in her left hand, crumpled in her fist. She did not cry. Her eyes were dry. The anger had burned away her tears. Only ash remained, and within the ash, a small, stubborn ember that refused to die. Footsteps approached. Light, even. Cale appeared in the doorway. He took in the broken glass, the water on the wall, Josie folded on the floor. He did not ask if she was all right. He did not ask what happened. He saw the letter in her hand and he understood. He stepped carefully through the shards and sat down beside her. Not across from her. Beside her, his shoulder touching hers. Warm, solid, steady. He did nothing else. He did not embrace her. He did not attempt to soothe or fix. He simply sat there on the cold wood floor, amid the broken glass, and let his presence speak. The silence stretched. 5 minutes, perhaps. Or 20. Josie did not know. She only felt the warmth from his shoulders seep slowly into hers, patient as spring thawing ice. The anger cooled, from blazing red to ember orange, from orange to soft rose, from rose to something that was no longer rage but sorrow. A clean sorrow. A sorrow that lifted instead of crushed. Finally she spoke, her voice rough but steady. My mother loved me. She always loved me. She swallowed, and he hid it. Cale was quiet for a moment. Then he answered, his tone low and deliberate. Each word placed as carefully as a step across a suspended bridge. He hid the letter. He paused. But he did not hide the flame. He turned to her, and in the warm lamplight his gray eyes held the tenderness she had come to recognize. Because it is still here. He lifted his hand and placed his palm gently against her chest over her heart. Not possessive, affirming. As if to show her, here, the flame Catherine held through winter night. It was not extinguished. It lives here. I can feel it. It still burns. Then he withdrew his hand and rose. He extended his arm toward her, his broad hand open in invitation. Go to bed, he said softly, not as a suggestion, but with the certainty of someone who knows what she needs. Tomorrow you will be stronger than you are today, because today you are stronger than you were yesterday. Josie looked at his hand, then into his eyes. She took his hand and let him help her to her feet. She did not cry. Her eyes were dry but bright, brighter than any night since she had come to Connecticut, bright with the knowledge that she had been loved, that she was loved now, that the flame within her was not granted by anyone's permission but inherited, passed down by her mother's hoarse song and unyielding arms on that final night. She held the letter carefully in her left hand, folded and warm, as one might shield a candle against wind, and walked beside Cale out of the library, stepping over broken glass without looking down, walking toward her bedroom, toward tomorrow, carrying the flame her mother had given her. The annual Dragovich Syndicate meeting took place on an October night, when the oak forest surrounding the estate had turned shades of red and gold, and the Connecticut air carried the scent of fallen leaves and cold earth. Josie had known about the gathering for 3 days. Leon, Cale's right hand, had knocked on the study door and spoken something in Slavic that she did not understand. Yet it had made Cale lift his gaze from the documents before him with an edge sharper than usual. That evening he had told her, as simply as ever, the family meeting. 3 days. You will sit beside me. It was not an invitation, not a suggestion. It was a fact, and she was part of it because she was part of him. She did not ask questions, but in the days that followed she felt something approaching, like a small animal sensing distant thunder before a storm. The basement of the estate was a place she had never entered. A spiral stone staircase descended into a chamber she had not imagined existed beneath the calm home, where she read books and drank coffee each morning. The walls were raw stone, dark and cool to the touch. The floor was heavy oak polished to a deep sheen beneath candlelight. Candles, not electric lights. Dozens of flames flickered from iron sconces along the walls, drawing shadows in and out so that the room seemed to breathe. In the center stood a long wooden table, scarred with scratches and burn marks like a map of old battles. Around it sat 12 men, 12 branch leaders of the Dragovich Syndicate. Josie understood at once that this was not Manhattan society. Not tailored suits and rehearsed smiles. This was another kind of power. Raw, heavy, dangerous. Faces lined with scars. Eyes shaped by violence and loyalty. Cale sat at the head of the table, spine straight, expression unreadable. Josie sat at his right. Not in a guest chair, in a place that belonged. The meeting moved between English and Slavic. Territory, alliances, names she did not know, numbers she did not follow. She did not need the details. She needed the room. And she felt, with the instinct of someone who had survived 22 years in hostile air, that those 12 pairs of eyes drifted toward her now and then. Quick, quiet, measuring, waiting. Then Vadim spoke. He sat midway down the left side, broad shoulders, a face carved by age and conflict, a long scar from temple to chin. His English carried a thick Eastern cadence. He did not look at Josie when he began. He looked at Cale. I respect the boss decision, but the family has the right to ask. Then he turned to her, eyes cold and direct. She is an outsider. No Dragovich blood. No children. What does she bring to the family? 12 gazes fixed on her. The weight of them pressed harder than 300 eyes at the Ashford Gala. Instinct made her glance toward Cale, seeking the shield he had been. But he did not look at her. He sat still, hands folded, eyes forward. No signal, no rescue. And she understood. This was hers. He had protected her before the world. Here, within his own house, she would stand on her own. She rose. The chair scraped softly across the wood, and the sound cracked through the silence like thunder. Her hands trembled beneath the table where no one could see. Her nails pressed into her palms. Blythe's voice echoed in memory. Empty vessel, nothing. She wanted to sit back down, to vanish. The old reflex tugged at her shoulders, at her chin. Then she looked at her hand. The black pearl caught candlelight, holding a quiet galaxy within its dark curve. She remembered the balcony, the words flame of her soul. She remembered her mother's letter. You are the flame I held through winter night. Her hands stilled. Her shoulders opened. She lifted her chin and met Vadim's gaze without blinking. You are right, she said. Calm, steady. I carry no Dragovich blood. I have no children. No lineage you can measure on paper. She let the pause rest and looked around the table at each scarred face without lowering her eyes. But I bring something that cannot be bought with money or inherited through blood. I survived 22 years among people who wanted me small, who looked at me and saw only what I lacked, who laughed, who humiliated, and I am still standing. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. You may doubt loyalty purchased with wealth. You may doubt loyalty born of blood. But you do not doubt loyalty forged by fire. Silence settled thick as smoke. Candles flickered. Vadim studied her, searching for weakness, for fracture, for falsehood. Then he nodded once. Slow, heavy, not easy approval. Recognition. At the head of the table, Cale's mouth curved slightly, almost invisible. Not a smile, a confirmation. Leon noticed. Vadim noticed. And Josie, who had learned to read his silence better than anyone, noticed. The night he had looked through 300 people and chosen her, he had not been wrong. A few days after the meeting, on an autumn night when so many oak leaves had fallen that the stone path from the gates to the estate lay beneath a red and gold carpet in the moonlight, Cale knocked on Josie's door. He rarely knocked. Most often, he simply appeared anywhere in the house as though he and the walls were made of the same substance. But that night he knocked. 3 firm, even raps. When Josie opened the door, she saw something on his face she had never seen before. Solemnity. not the cold formality of a syndicate leader greeting associates. Something older, deeper. The gravity of a man about to perform a rite that had existed before he was born and would endure long after he was gone. "Come with me," he said, and turned without waiting for her reply, because he knew she would follow. Not out of obedience, out of trust. He led her down the spiral stone staircase she had descended on the night of the family council. This time, instead of turning left toward the large chamber, he turned right into a narrower corridor, lower, darker. Candles replaced electric light entirely. The stone walls held the chill of damp earth. The passage stretched perhaps 20 steps, before ending at a heavy oak door secured only by an iron bar. Cale lifted the bar with one hand in the easy motion of someone who had done so many nights before. The door opened. Josie stepped inside. The room was small, smaller than any she had seen in the estate. Unfinished stone walls, a low ceiling, floorboards darkened nearly black with age. 4 iron stands held candles in the corners, their warm flames moving slowly, and the air was thick with the scent of old wood, beeswax, and thyme. This was not a room for the living. It was a room for memory, for history, for what was kept not because of material worth but because of sacred meaning. At the center, resting on a plain oak stand without glass or ornament, lay a knife. Josie's breath caught softly. The blade was perhaps a span and a half long, forged of Damascus steel, its surface rippling with pale and dark waves like water under wind, so sharp that candlelight skimmed along its edge in a thread of brightness fine as hair. The hilt was wrapped in silver. Upon that silver, a wolf was carved in relief, coiled yet alert, head lifted, mouth slightly open, each strand of fur etched so precisely it seemed to stir in the firelight. The wolf's eyes were 2 small rubies, dark red as clotted blood. In the candlelight, they glimmered with something that felt ancient. "Volkov," Cale said beside her, his voice carrying a quiet reverence she had never heard before, like a prayer spoken in an old cathedral. "The soul of the Dragovich family, 4 generations." He fell silent, gazing at the knife. And Josie realized this was one of the few times she had seen him look at anything with tenderness. "The tradition of the family," he continued slowly, "is that the wife of the leader keeps Volkov. She is the heart of the family. She guards its soul, while her husband is the blade." He turned toward her. In his gray eyes, warmed amber by candlelight, she saw something she would never forget. Vulnerability, brief, a fine crack in steel, but real, and meant for her. "My mother kept it. Before her, my grandmother. They were strong women." He paused. They were chosen by blood. He faced her fully. Only a single step separated them. Candlelight moved across their faces in shifting light and shadow, as though darkness and flame themselves bore witness. His eyes held something deeper than any declaration before 300 guests, deeper than his confession on the balcony, deeper than his palm against her heart. They held choice, a choice weighed not in a night but over months. In every morning he brought her coffee. In every late hour he read under lamplight, knowing she stood outside the door. In every moment he watched her rise again after falling. "You are the first chosen not by blood," he said softly, each word heavy as forged steel, "but by soul." He turned back to the stand and lifted Volkov with both hands, careful and reverent. He laid it across his open palms, the blade gleaming, the ruby eyes turned upward, and he offered it to her. Offered, not merely handed. Offered as one offers a vow, as one offers what is most precious. "I give you my soul, Josephine." She looked at the blade, at the rippling steel, at the coiled silver wolf, at the twin rubies like drops of living red. Then she looked into his eyes and saw there what she had once seen in her own when reading Catherine's letter, a love that did not require words to exist. She extended both hands and received Volkov from him. It was heavy, heavier than its size should allow, as though 4 generations of history, of Dragovich women, of trust and sacrifice, had been forged into the steel, heavy as his heart, as his past, as his soul. The metal lay cold in her palms. The rubies watched her like living eyes. Tears rose even as her mouth curved in a smile. She laughed and wept at once, because the orphan girl from Brooklyn now held the soul of an empire in her hands, and it was too beautiful and too impossible for her body to choose between tears and joy. "I will guard it," she said, her voice trembling yet firm, her eyes wet yet bright. "With my life." Cale answered not with words. He placed his hands over hers, enclosing her hands and the knife together, his warmth covering the chill of steel, his fingers closing gently around hers. They stood there in the stone chamber beneath the earth, 4 candles burning in the corners, the silver wolf resting between 8 intertwined fingers, ruby eyes glinting in shared palms, and nothing more needed to be said. Everything had been spoken through the weight of steel, through the warmth of skin, through firelight on ruby facets, and through the sacred silence understood only by 2 souls who had found each other in the dark. 1 year later. Winter. Manhattan lay beneath snow. The first flakes of December drifted down upon the city like silver dust, settling on rooftops, on sidewalks, on the shoulders of pedestrians hunched inside heavy coats, softening New York into a gentler version of itself, as though someone had drawn a white veil across its sharp features to soothe the wounds it always carried. Tonight was the Dragovich winter reception, the first gathering Cale and Josie hosted together, not merely as hosts welcoming guests, but as 2 people standing side by side before the world and saying, "This is who we are." The setting was the Obsidian, the Dragovich family's private restaurant atop a building in Tribeca, and the name fit with almost fated precision. Inside, everything was black and gold. Matte black stone walls, polished black floors, dark wood tables and chairs, hundreds of golden candles burning across every flat surface, casting a warmth that trembled and lived in a way no crystal chandelier in the Ashford ballroom ever had. Massive windows opened to the Manhattan skyline, and beyond the glass the snow fell slowly, gently, white flakes turning and drifting like tiny dancers performing for her alone. Josie stood in the private dressing room behind the main dining hall and looked into the mirror. For the 3rd time, the first time she had stood before a mirror in this story had been in the Ashford dressing room before the gala, wearing the wine-red gown Blythe had chosen, staring at a ghost. A woman clothed by someone else's decision, breathing air permitted by someone else, existing by someone else's consent. The 2nd time had been in the Connecticut bathroom after facing Blythe at the iron gates, when she had seen herself again, no longer a ghost, eyes brighter, spine straighter, yet still carrying the astonishment of someone newly found after long wandering. Now, this 3rd time, in the Obsidian dressing room with snow falling beyond the small window and candles flickering across the vanity, she saw a queen, not because of a crown, not because of power, not because of the black pearl ring gleaming on her finger, or because Volkov rested in its glass case back in Connecticut awaiting her return, but because of her eyes. The gray-blue gaze in the mirror did not apologize, not for existing, not for taking up space, not for being seen. Those eyes held the calm of someone who had walked through darkness and knew with certainty that darkness no longer held authority over her for 28 years. She wore black velvet, a boat neckline, ruthlessly simple. No stones, no lace, no excess detail, only velvet embracing her body the way night embraces flame. She had chosen this dress herself. Not Blythe, not anyone else. She had walked into a shop, seen it, touched the velvet, felt its softness and weight beneath her fingers, and known, not because it was the most beautiful, but because it was hers, simple, strong, unadorned yet complete. Her dark brown hair was swept up, revealing the curve of her neck, the place where Cale often pressed his lips in the morning before she was fully awake. A quiet gesture he never named yet, she felt as surely as sunrise. The black pearl caught candlelight, holding a dark galaxy within its depth, heavy and familiar, no longer jewelry but part of her. She studied her reflection a moment longer, not to inspect, not to search for flaw, but to remember the girl in the wine-red dress standing beside a cold granite column, lowering her head, swallowing tears, trying to disappear among 300 strangers. To remember and to be grateful. Not only grateful to Cale, though gratitude for him ran deeper than language, grateful to herself. Grateful to that girl who did not collapse, who stood upright when the world demanded she bow, who guarded the flame Catherine had lit on a winter night in Brooklyn and carried it through 23 years of darkness, through Blythe's ridicule, through Warren's indifference, through every look of pity and contempt, guarding it without knowing it was there, until a man with winter-gray eyes looked through 300 people and said, "I see the flame." Josie smiled at the woman in the mirror. The woman smiled back, and neither of them apologized for anything. Josie stepped out of the dressing room, and the world beyond received her in golden candlelight and the soft drift of jazz from the main hall of the Obsidian. She moved down the short corridor of black stone, her heels striking the floor in an even rhythm, each step clear and assured. Not the cautious tread of a ghost trying to disappear, but the stride of a woman who knew exactly where she was going and required no permission to arrive. The corridor opened at the head of a wide staircase leading into the main hall, and at the foot of those steps, Cale waited. A black suit, impeccably cut, shaping his broad shoulders and tall frame like a second layer of shadow. A silver wolf pin gleamed on his left lapel, its tiny ruby eye catching the candlelight. He stood with his arms at his sides, spine straight, expression composed. Gray eyes lifted toward the staircase. Toward her. She saw him, see her, and in his gaze was something she had first glimpsed a year ago, on the 60th floor balcony of the Ashford Tower, but had not yet dared to name. Now she could. It was pride, not possession, not the look of a man admiring a trophy. It was the pride of someone who had seen flame where the world saw ash, and now stood watching that flame burn brighter than even he had imagined. He said nothing as she descended, no compliment about the black velvet dress, no murmured admiration, none of the countless phrases other men might have offered. He simply extended his hand, palm open, waiting. Josie placed her hand in his. Naturally, gently, without hesitation, as though her hand had always belonged there, had always been traveling toward that resting place. And the night he first held it, he had not found space for her hand, but her hand had found its way home. They entered the obsidian together. This time she did not walk behind him, not half a step back, not sheltered behind the steel of his presence as she once had in those early weeks in Connecticut. She walked beside him, shoulder aligned with shoulder. Her stride matched to his, two lines running parallel toward the same horizon, never colliding, never separating. The crowd parted. 200 guests from the highest circles of New York, allied families, financiers, political figures, faces Josie would not have dared meet a year ago, shifted aside as they passed, yet she sensed the difference. At the Ashford Gala, space had been given out of fear, instinctive caution before a predator. Tonight the path opened for another reason, for the force created when two complete beings chose to stand together, steel and flame, storm and stillness, a field of gravity that those nearby could feel without explanation. The evening unfolded in candlelight and low conversation, in red wine and snow drifting beyond the glass. Josie moved among guests with a confidence that would once have been unimaginable, offering her hand, her smile, her voice, and each exchange felt no longer like survival but simply like meeting another human being. Then Pamela Whitford appeared, 60 years old, platinum hair perfectly arranged, 4 strands of pearls resting at her throat, a smile broad enough to appear gracious if one did not look too closely at her eyes, where warmth ended and something sharper began. Pamela Whitford ruled Manhattan gossip, and for 3 decades her whispers had elevated or destroyed reputations, with a cruelty she preferred to call honesty. She approached Josie with a champagne flute in hand, her voice pitched just high enough for nearby ears. Josephine. Josie, is it? She tilted her head as though searching memory. I remember you at the Ashford Gala last year, standing by a column. Alone. She sipped her champagne and watched, waiting for the flinch, the fracture, the shrinking girl in the wine-red gown. That was Pamela's craft. Remind someone of their worst night and watch them crumble. Josie did not shrink. She did not glance toward Cale, who stood several steps away speaking with an allied leader, his mouth engaged in conversation while his gray eyes never truly left her. She did not require his shield, not because she did not need him, but because she had learned to stand. She met Pamela's gaze and smiled. Soft, warm, untroubled. I remember, she said evenly. That column was very cold. She paused just long enough for Pamela to anticipate vulnerability, just long enough for her to lean forward like a cat scenting weakness. But Josie continued, still smiling. It taught me how to stand when there is nothing to lean on. Pamela blinked. Her smile hesitated, uncertain how to adjust, because for the first time in 30 years, she had not drawn collapse nor defiance, but calm. There was nothing to pierce, no seam to unravel, only still water that swallowed every stone without ripple. Pamela laughed, this time without venom, inclined her head, lifted her glass in a small salute to the air, and withdrew, silk whispering across black stone. Cale had witnessed every second. His conversation never faltered, yet his eyes had not missed a breath. He saw Josie meet Pamela without him, saw her smile when tested, saw her remain upright when pushed, and in his gaze the light she had noticed on the staircase glowed again. Pride. Beneath it, something deeper, warmer. The look of a man watching a woman stand among a crowd like flame in darkness, and knowing with complete certainty that the night he looked through 300 people and stopped at her, he had not been mistaken. Not then, not ever. The reception thinned the way a tide retreats from shore. The last guests shook hands, nodded politely, slipped into their coats, and disappeared into the snowy Manhattan night, leaving behind the great hall of the Obsidian scattered with empty glasses, candles burned low, and that particular silence that comes only after a crowd has gone. A silence still faintly perfumed, still echoing with laughter, yet peaceful at its core. Josie stood beside the vast window and watched the snow fall, feeling a familiar pull drawing her toward the balcony. She opened the glass door and stepped outside. The cold struck her cheeks at once, sharp and clean and bracing, exactly as it had a year earlier when she first stepped onto the 60th floor balcony of the Ashford Tower with Cale. Snow settled lightly in her hair, along the shoulders of her black velvet dress, across the steel railing, dusting everything in white, like powdered sugar over dark cake. Manhattan stretched beneath them just as it had that night. Millions of lights flickering, traffic moving in slow ribbons along the grid, the jagged skyline etched against a violet-gray sky. The same city, yet everything was different. That night she had stood with swollen eyes and a black pearl newly heavy on her finger, her shattered heart being lifted for the first time and told it held worth. Tonight she stood with dry eyes, the pearl no longer foreign but part of her body, and a heart healed. Not healed because it bore no scars, but healed because those scars had become strength instead of pain. She heard footsteps behind her, light, even, so familiar she did not need to turn. Cale stepped onto the balcony and took his place beside her on the left, close enough that she felt his warmth, not touching. He did not draw her nearer. He did not rest a hand at her back. He simply stood there, present, steady, like the granite column she once leaned against, only warmer, alive, and hers. The silence between them lengthened, but it was not emptiness. It was the silence they had built over a year, brick by brick, from mornings spent reading side by side, from nights he sat in lamplight while she lingered outside the door, from a cup of black coffee resting atop pages of handwritten pain, from a palm placed over her heart. That silence was their house, stronger than the gray stone walls in Connecticut. Snow fell. City lights shimmered below. Their breath rose in pale clouds and vanished into the cold. Then Cale spoke, his voice low and measured, his gaze fixed on the city rather than on her, as though what he was about to say weighed too much to be spoken while meeting her eyes. "You know," he began. He paused. Snow gathered on his black jacket and melted into small, dark marks. "That night at the Ashford Gala." Another pause. Josie turned slightly, watching the line of his jaw, the straight bridge of his nose, the gray eyes fixed on distance, and she waited, because she had learned that with Cale the pauses mattered more than the words. "I did not save you." She turned fully toward him. He faced her then. His eyes, winter ocean deep and endless, held something new. A year ago they had carried resolve, recognition, the cool certainty of a man claiming what he had chosen. Tonight they held warmth, not surface warmth, not thawing ice, a warmth like fire burning at the ocean floor, a heat you reach only by diving past layers of cold and darkness and crushing pressure. A fire beneath the sea, and it burned for her. "You saved me." 3 words. Cale Dragovich, leader of the syndicate, a man the eastern seaboard feared, a man who had never owed, never needed, never admitted to lacking anything, spoke 3 plain words. Not "I love you," not "I need you," though perhaps both were true. "You saved me." For a man who lost his father at 19 to betrayal, who rebuilt an empire from ash with blood and iron, who had lived 37 years in a world where every bond was a transaction and every vow had an expiration date, to confess that someone had saved him, that he had needed saving, that he had not been enough alone, was the bravest act of his life. Braver than the night he tried to stop the blade that killed his father and earned the scar along his arm. Braver than the night he walked into the Ashford ballroom and chose her before 300 witnesses. Because this time he was not strong. This time he allowed himself to be vulnerable, and he let her see it. Josie looked at him, at the gray eyes she had learned to read through 12 months, eyes that were cold for the world and warm for her, eyes that saw her when others saw through her, eyes that saw flame and ash. She understood that his words were not gratitude and not weakness. They were love, expressed in the only language Kale Dragovich trusted. Truth. Steel without gilding. Fire without silk. A year ago he saw her standing by a cold column and recognized a flame. He did not know that flame would warm him as well. He did not know the orphan girl from Brooklyn, the so-called empty vessel, would fill the hollow inside him that 37 years of power and fear could not. He believed he was setting her free. In truth, she was setting him free. Josie did not cry. This time she did not need to. She had cried enough. She had wept tears of pain in the Ashford bathroom with the water running so no one would hear. She had wept tears of release on the 60th floor balcony when a stranger told her that her suffering had forged her into steel. She had wept broken, grateful tears in a small Brooklyn church when she learned that a 19-year-old girl had held her through the night and called her a flame. She had wept angry tears on the library floor among shattered glass when she learned that love had been stolen from her. She had cried every kind of tear a human being can cry. And now, standing on the balcony of the Obsidian beneath the Manhattan snow, looking into the deep gray eyes that had just spoken 3 words heavier than any oath, she did not need tears. Instead, she smiled, and the smile was unlike any she had ever worn. It was bright, open. It reached the bottom of her eyes, a place light had not touched in 28 years. It was the smile the 5-year-old girl in a Brooklyn orphanage hallway, clutching a torn stuffed animal, had never dared imagine. It was the smile of someone who had finally found home. She stepped closer. 1 step. The space between them vanished. She lifted her hand and placed her palm against his chest, directly over his heart. Through the black fabric she felt the beat. Steady. Strong. Sure. The heartbeat of the man who lost his father at 19 and never let anyone close again until her. The heartbeat of the man who saw her when the world looked through her, a heart of steel and storm and winter ocean. Yet beneath her hand it was warm and alive in hers. "You and I," she said softly. Not a whisper, yet not loud. Only enough for the 2 of them and the falling snow. 2 people forged by fire. Snow gathered in her hair, along his shoulders, across her hand resting over his heart. But instead of burning into ash, we burn into light. Kale looked at her for a long moment. He looked into her gray-blue eyes shining under city lights and snow, at the smile on her lips, at her hand pressed to his chest. And he did something the 12 branch leaders of the Dragovich Syndicate, Leon, Vadim, anyone who had ever known Kale Dragovich would swear he would never do. He placed his hand over hers, covered it, held it there over his heart, as if to say, "This beat belongs to you, and always has." Then he bent his head slowly and pressed his lips to her forehead. Slow, long, gentle, his mouth warm against her skin in the cold snow, warmth spreading from her brow down to her eyes, her throat, her chest, to the deepest place where Catherine's winter flame burned brighter than ever. It was not a kiss of passion, not a cinematic kiss. It was a vow. The kiss of a man who had found home. Not in gray stone and oak in Connecticut, not in black stone and gold candlelight in Tribeca, but in a person. In her. Snow fell across the balcony. 2 figures stood together, her hand over his heart, his hand over hers, her forehead beneath his lips, white settling upon them like a mantle. 2 silhouettes, not dissolving into each other, not losing their outlines, but remaining whole. 2 complete worlds choosing to orbit one another. Steel and flame, storm and stillness. The black pearl on Josie's finger caught the snowlight, holding a dark galaxy that shimmered and breathed with her breath. And back in Connecticut, within the gray stone estate among bare winter oaks, in the underground chamber where candles had long burned out but beeswax still lingered in the air, Volkov rested in its glass case upon the oak stand. The Damascus blade reflected a sliver of moonlight, its watery patterns brightening and dimming like breath. The ruby in the wolf's eye glowed in the dark, red as blood, red as fire, waiting for its keeper to return. Josie Ashford, the orphan girl from Brooklyn, the 5-year-old with a torn toy in an orphanage corridor. Warren Ashford's charitable investment. The cracked vessel Blythe once mocked. The burden. The ghost in another family's house. She stood on a Tribeca balcony with snow in her dark hair, black velvet at her shoulders, black pearl at her hand, fire in her soul. No longer a ghost. She was the flame Catherine, 19 and poor and alone, held through a Brooklyn winter night and passed to her daughter in a hoarse lullaby, an unyielding embrace. She was the stillness within Kale Dragovich's storm, the strongest man on the eastern seaboard who found his truest strength in her gray-blue eyes. She was keeper of the wolf's soul, the first chosen not by blood but by spirit. And that night, beneath Manhattan's snow, her hand resting over the heart of the man she loved, she knew with certainty in bone and blood and breath that nothing could shake. She belonged. The story of Josie and Kale is not only a love story, it is a story about the strength of those once called weak, about light born in darkness, about worth measured not by what you produce, but by what you survive. If there is a lesson to carry from her journey, it may be this: never allow another person to define your value, because those who judge you often have not endured even a fraction of what you have endured. And sometimes the one who truly sees you is not the one who has stood beside you the longest, but the one who looks through ash and recognizes flame. If this story has touched your heart, please consider sharing it with someone you love, someone who may need to be reminded that they are worthy of love, worthy of being seen, worthy of standing tall. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories of resilience and light rising from shadow. We would love to know how this story resonates with you. Has there been a moment in your life when someone saw your worth while the world turned away? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories inspire us to continue creating content that reaches the soul. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and peace in your heart each day. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Goodbye for now, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.